Welcome to session 2 of Through the Bible in 90 Days. Today we are studying Genesis chapter 17, verse 1 through Genesis chapter 28, verse 19. In these passages, the covenant of God with Abraham represents God's unwavering faithfulness to fulfill his promises and how God's promises are sure. These passages also reveal God's perfect timing and God's call to walk in integrity despite temptation, knowing that his grace enables us to overcome our failures. I'm Dr. J. David Taylor. Let's get started. In these scriptures, God's covenant with Abraham represents his unwavering faithfulness to fulfill his promises. In Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 to 8, God establishes a covenant with Abraham, promising Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. This covenant was not contingent on Abraham's performance, but on God's faithful character. See, as believers, we must trust that God will always fulfill his promises, regardless of our circumstances. This covenant with Abraham, marked by the sign of circumcision, also is a symbol of the enduring relationship between God and his people. It teaches us that God's promises are sure and that we are invited into a covenant of grace, not works. And I will multiply my covenant between thee and me, and will multiply thee exceedingly. Genesis 17:2. This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. Genesis 17, verse 10. See, God's promises are fulfilled in his perfect timing and not our own. In Genesis chapter 18, verses 10 to 14, when Sarah hears that she will bear a son in her old age, she laughs in disbelief. See, God's promise to give her a son seemed impossible, yet God's response reminds her that there is nothing too hard for God. The fulfillment of God's promises is not bound by human limitations, but by his divine will and his divine timing. So as believers, we are called to trust in God's timing, even when circumstances suggest otherwise, knowing that he is faithful to do what he has said. Oh, Genesis says just this, 18:14, it says, is there anything too hard for the Lord? Genesis 18:12 said, at the appointed time, I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Wow. See, Abraham and Isaac's journey reminds us of the ongoing struggles against temptation and the call to live with integrity. In Genesis chapter 20, Abraham again deceived Abimelech about Sarah being his sister. This failure mirrors his previous sin in Egypt and highlights the challenge of walking in righteousness. Later, Isaac, Abraham's son, repeats the same sin. However, God intervenes, showing grace even when his people fall. As believers, we must seek to walk in integrity even as we acknowledge our weaknesses. See, God's grace enables us to overcome our failures and continue to fulfill his purpose for our lives. Genesis 26:9 says this, and Isaac said unto them, because I said, lest I die for her. Genesis 20:11 says, and Abraham said, because I thought, surely the fear of the Lord is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. Imagine, if you would, standing at the edge of a vast desert where nothing seems to grow, nothing seems to work. The land seems barren. The promises made to you feel distant. Yet God says to you, I will make you the father of many nations. See, this is the promise that God gave to Abraham. It's not a promise born of Abraham's human power, but from God's faithfulness and God's perfect timing. See, that same God, the God of Abraham, is offering you and I the same promise today. The question is, do you believe that God's promises are sure, even when everything around you says otherwise? See, here's the balance that we chase. Here's the challenge that we face. In this world, we are constantly told that timing is everything and that we must make things happen ourselves. We struggle to trust in God's timing. We see circumstances that are beyond our control and we think, how could God possibly fulfill his promises in my life now? Yet, just as Abraham was able to call to trust God even when the promise seemed impossible, we are called called to trust in God's timing, his plan, and his faithfulness. We will trust that God knows exactly when to bring about his promises to pass in our lives. We must trust. We will trust. We must know that God is indeed able to bring about his promises to pass in our lives. So let me challenge you to see your life through a new lens. What if instead of trying to manipulate your circumstances or force outcomes, you trusted in God's perfect timing? What if you stopped worrying about how things would unfold and simply walked in obedience, knowing that God who promised Abraham is the same God who has promised you? See, God will fulfill God's promises just as he did with Isaac, the long-awaited son, just as he did for Abraham, and just as he is doing today in your life. God's covenant is not conditional on our perfection, yours nor mine, but on his faithfulness. Our timeline doesn't determine the power of God's promises. Our trust in God does. See, it's time to stop waiting for the perfect moment. It's time to stop thinking that you need to be in control. God is at work in your life right now, even if you can't see it. Don't let your doubts or fears stop you from walking in the promises God has already given you. Every day is a new opportunity to step forward in faith, knowing that he who promises is faithful. Just like Abraham and Sarah had to wait for their promise, and just like Isaac had to step into the promises of his father, you have to trust that God's timing is always perfect. So I ask you, will you trust in the faithfulness of God? Wow. Will you walk in his promises even when the timing doesn't seem right? Will you stop trying to force your own way and trust in his perfect plan for your life? This isn't just about believing God exists. It's about believing in his promises for your life and walking in them every single day. God is calling you and I to step into the promise he has for you right now. Will you respond in faith, knowing that he is always faithful to fulfill what he has spoken? I have 3 life-changing declarations today that I want to share with you. One is, I declare that I will trust in God's perfect timing, knowing that he is faithful to fulfill every promise he has made to me. I declare that I will walk in integrity and righteousness even when faced with temptation, because God's grace is sufficient to help me overcome. I declare that I will align my life with God's covenant promises, reflecting his faithfulness and trusting in his plan for my future. Well, our time is up, and thank you for joining us in the study of Genesis chapter 17 verse 1 through Genesis chapter 28 verse 19. In these passages, the covenant of God with Abraham represented God's unwavering faithfulness to fulfill his promises and how his promises are sure. They also reveal God's perfect timing and God's call to walk in integrity despite temptation, knowing that his grace enables us to overcome our failures. This was session 2 of Through the Bible in 90 Days. I'm Dr. J. David Taylor Jr., and I will see you next time.